Hey, this is Chris, and welcome to EnterVR's VR UX 101 series. Today I'm speaking with Andy Tsen. Andy is working on Project Zenith, I believe, and welcome. I'm excited for a conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Cool. So, cool avatar, by the way. Let's talk about Project Zenith. Let's for the uninitiated. What is it? How did it get started? And walk me through that for really quick.
Well, Zenith is a massively multiplayer online game that we're building specifically for VR, and it's going to be cross-platform on all the different VR platforms on desktop and the Quest and the Quest 2. And we're building it. It's going to be it's going to be a massive world. It's inspired by JRPGs and anime, but we're both Lauren and I are huge fans of that genre and games like Final Fantasy 14 and Nier Automata. So we wanted to build something that that brings us as close as we can to the MMO experience within VR.
Yeah. So you already mentioned some of your inspirations for Zenith, and Nier Automata is one of the most, I would say, it's most underrated games that I've ever come
Oh, I
across.
agree.
It's just
Yeah.
so, and it's one of those games where like you got to turn on your brain for a minute because it's like there's more to it than sexy androids and robots. Like there's this very deep lore, and I just feel like more people should try it. And but and so on the that's like sort of on the video game, and it feels like there's gonna be some gameplay mechanics that will kind of in the world might have some inspiration from it. But I'm also curious to know more about like in terms of the UX for it, like um everything covering the UI, everything covering sort of like just the general experience and the feeling of the game. Like, what do you have any anime inspirations? Is perhaps Sword Art Online in there, or any other like cyberpunk kind of animes that have inspired the game?
Well, I could say that I'm definitely a fan of Sword Art Online. I think season one is the best. The rest of the seasons are a little bit wordy and overexposed with the exposition. But um, when I look at UI and UX from those types of Hollywood or anime films, they're trying to display things visually in a way that looks cool. So, for example, you have things like Minority Report with the gorilla arms, where it looks really cool to be manipulating UI in space, but like in reality, you would never want to do that, right? Same thing with many of the game mechanics that you'll see in games like or in anime like Sword Art Online or movies like Ready Player One. Like they're things that people think would be cool, but in actuality aren't that cool. So things we take more inspiration from those games are more, games and other forms of media. I would say are more along the lines of aesthetics and what might look cool to people, and less along the lines of like UX specifically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially because it you do tend to go for like these types of medium like media. It feels like they're, and my curiosity really comes from like what does that struggle look like to like try to see, like, take as much as you can from them as inspiration, but also not completely copy. And how are you finding out, like, is it just basic just testing, like realizing that, man, this menu system from Nier Automata or this other game, like, sure, works great for the pancake mode, but when you try to bring it in VR, it's just too much work, too much hassle. Like,
Yeah, it's I wouldn't say we take any inspiration in terms of UX from those. So there's no struggle to be like, oh, this thing in near the UX, the UX on this is great. We'd like to bring it into VR. When we look at things like UI elements, then those are things that we'll consider bringing in, like the aesthetic, for example. We like Nier has a very nice, clean aesthetic, minimalist. I've been playing a lot of Genshin Impact lately, and that has a lot of that has a lot of cool, futuristic, kind of clean-looking UI as well. So when we see cool ideas on the art side of things that we want to bring in, that's actually not too hard to port in. In terms of UX, we much prefer to look at triple A VR games or popular social VR games or popular VR experiences, and then take what we can from there, try it in our game, and then iterate on it many times to hit the kind of aesthetic that we're going for. So in general, we try to. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we try to avoid actually having. We try to have the least amount of UI possible in the game. We want it to be. We have this massive, gorgeous, anime-inspired world that we want people to be able to explore freely, and so we don't want a lot of UI blocking their experience of the world itself.
I like that way of approaching this, because I think I just want to. I'm gonna just jump into it because there's I was holding this question back for later, but you know what? Let's just right into it. Orbis VR is one of those really, shout out to that team. They really took a huge leap of faith in trying to create their own VR MMO. And when I played it, I remember feeling like, wow, this is the beginning of something amazing. But here's the thing, again, props to them for going on the forefront. But I felt like playing that game, 60% of my time in it was looking up at a menu and managing my inventory and trying to learn like the best weapon combinations and just like, the community was great, by the way. Everyone was super nice and friendly, but there just felt like there was such a huge, I don't know, it just feels like there was a lot of work that I had to do to really enjoy the game. And it was because, again, it was just like it was just a lot of work to just manage the inventory and just and learn how to like, oh, okay, so what do I need to do to take up my sword? Oh, I have to do this particular movement that isn't particularly intuitive, and just a lot of little things like that. But mostly just the cumbersome, hate to say the word, cumbersome UI that I was just like struggling with, and I had to leave the game after like 5 hours of really wanting to like it. How do you not run into that problem? And I guess you already sort of mentioned a little bit about how you don't want the UI to really take over the world, but talk to me a little bit more about how you won't run into that particular problem that Orbis ran into.
Well, that's a good question. So, I think first of all, when we're building Zenith, we're trying to build kind of an experience that's unique, and so like I have a lot of respect for the team over at Orbis. I've actually spoken to Riley several times via email. Super nice, super chill person, and gave me a lot of really great advice. So what I'll say is this, for us, we're trying to have more of a action RPG feel to our game, which means that we will focus more on. I don't know if you've played any like Black Desert Online or anything like that, but There's a lot of really cool kind of combat mechanics that and ways to interact with the world that are a lot less UI driven. I think when we're talking about UI management and inventory management, there's still going to be some amount of that, but it's not going to be. It's going to be in a way that's really presentable and hopefully minimalized. So, I'll give you an example. Instead of having like one of our design principles is not to overload the player with too many abilities. It's not WoW where you have like hotkeys 1 through 10, and then you can press shift to have another 10 abilities. Everything you're going to be doing in the game is very you have a couple of buttons and a couple of gestures that you can do with your hands. And so our goal is to essentially make the game as easy to use as possible without having to make the person interact with UI. Now, on the other hand, there's still going to be some amount of inventory and UI management. We're not going for like a full physically based UI because I think that would be that caters to a very specific niche. And one of the things that we're very concerned about when we're designing Zenith is energy fatigue. So we don't want people moving their hands around to grab like a sword from the ground or bend over and pick stuff up. And we just want to make it easy for people and accessible for people to play the game.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about the core fighting mechanics in terms of and how you balance that idea of not for example that idea of making sure that players don't use up too much energy, or you don't run into that energy fatigue issue where let me try to remember a good game for this, or a good comparison. In VR, there's this roguelike game called Until You Fall.
Until You Fall.
Yeah. And that one is really, really good. It has, and then on the other hand, there's another one where it's like Blade and Sorcery. And Blade and Sorcery is more physics-based. Until You Fall is more sort of like time-based. And they're both a workout. And I'm trying to just figure out, which one, which approach would you go for in terms of is it? Because I guess I guess the other way of looking at it is like something like Monster Hunter versus what's another game that's like Monster Hunter versus like Dark Souls. Where like Monster Hunter, I feel like you just mash the button, and eventually you kill the monster. Dark Souls, it feels like you're burning calories, where you're like you really gotta focus and time yourself and really do the right combination of moves. And so in Zenith, is it gonna be where like I'm just gotta have to swing my arm around? In terms of the fighting mechanic, or is there gonna be or is there gonna just be more strategy or brute strength? I guess what your approach looks like on that front, it feels a little murky for me. And so perhaps you can, enlighten me more would be great.
So we do have we released a short gameplay trailer recently that kind of shows off some of our melee combat. And so in it, you can see mechanics like parrying and blocking and attacking, and we're trying to make it feel as physical as possible, but we're not going for a physics game. It's not going to be like Blade and Sorcery. We want it to feel physical, kind of like like Swords of Gargantua or Until You Fall, where you have these blocking mechanics and it feels really good. there is going to be there is skill involved. It's not just about slashing. You're going to have to learn how to time your attacks. One of the ways that we are, we minimize energy fatigue is by encouraging people to time their attacks in certain ways, while parrying blows and trading attacks, so that the neural sword fighting method is not rewarded in the game. Neither is, swinging your sword like you're throwing a fastball, because that gets exhausting really quickly, right? There's a lot of games out there that's like, oh, it's based on velocity. But I think in an MMO, that kind of gameplay, quickly leads to exhaustion. So we're able to, put some timing mechanics into our game to ensure that the player is kind of going into this dance with their opponents. It's funny that you mentioned Dark Souls, because one of the ways we pitch this to, publishers and investors are that we're like Dark Souls meets World of Warcraft, not in terms of scope, because that would be crazy for our small team, but in terms of the game feel that we're going for, in that it's a visceral, action-packed, action-adventure type of, adrenaline-pumping gameplay mixed with the colorful open world of something like a WoW or Final Fantasy. Obviously, that's the part we're trying to draw comparisons from, not the bone-crushing difficulty of Dark Souls, because Dark Souls is, it's known for being a merciless game that you just die over and over again. Our game is going to be a little bit more casual, at least in the early, during the grind, and then late game will become really challenging as you encounter, party events and things like that.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned party events, because that leads up to the next round of questions I have in terms of
sure.
How do you plan? What does your plans look like to allow for social interactions? It's sort of like smoother social interactions. Like, how do you encourage that, or is it one of those? Or do you have a plan for both, where if you want to be a lone wolf, be a lone wolf? Or is your thought process more like, oh, you know what? We want to encourage teamwork. So we want to do these sets of things so that encourages players to actually find others to party up and go, do quests and stuff together. What is your thought process on that?
Well, one thing I've always liked about VR is how, tight-knit the community has been. And, Chris, I know you've been there pretty much since the beginning. I don't know if you remember, but we actually interviewed when you were doing your podcast many years ago.
Oh.
Yeah. It's crazy how it's been 5 or 6 years, so I wouldn't expect you to rember. But
whoa, really? Hold on, that's crazy. Huh. Well, that caught me off guard there. When was this?
Yeah, we weren't even working on the same thing. Back then, it was a product. It was called Tribe VR, and we were working on a social app.
Yeah.
That was about being in the same room with your friends and loved ones as if you were in the same place. Kind of like, VR chat or big screen and or some of these other things that have come out since then. That's what we were working on.
You guys were a Boost VC company back then? Was it Boost VC?
No, this is before Boost even started investing in VR companies, I think. We hadn't gotten any funding at the time.
Wow.
But that actually, it ended up not going anywhere. And then a couple of years later, we tried again, and this time we got into Y Combinator, and now we're backed by some of the best gaming investors, and the COO of Twitch and is investing in us as well. So we've really come a long way. I'm sorry, that was a really, I'm sorry to derail the interview.
No worries, but congratulations. And holy shit, I can't believe, mea culpa for forgetting that we've interviewed so long ago. It's been a minute, but man, because you know what, VR, 5 years, 6 years in VR feels like 20 years. So much has happened.
Right.
But congrats, and please continue. Sorry for interrupting.
I think that might have been DK2 days, before CV1 even came out. But yeah, I mean, the point I'm trying to make is like the community is so important inside VR, and so one of the things we're doing is we're already building our community via our Discord now. We already have 11,000 people in there that are really highly active and engaged, and that way when we launch on day one, we have a lot of users that are already in there and playing the game. I think there's going to be two types of ways people get to know each other in our game, and one is either they know each other from outside the community, they bring people in, and then they just play together. And then the other one is serendipitously in world events and while they're adventuring through the world of Zenith. And so we have things that are, we have social features that are planned for both. Things like friends are more about, can be used for both, adding people you see in the world, also just adding friends outside of the world. Other social structures like parties and guilds will facilitate, which will be there at launch, will facilitate more group interaction. But we're also excited about just the random events that people will discover while they're exploring the world, both procedural and scripted events. Things like world bosses, for example, where people will be able to just, they don't have to be in a party or anything. They'll just meet at a certain location to fight a boss or do a certain event. Kind of similar to things like Fates in Final Fantasy XIV and in Destiny, you have those flag events, those rally points. So we're hoping there's a mixture of both, like in our content loop, serendipitous things like the things I just described, as well as your more traditional parties and friends lists and guilds and things like that.
I'm very curious to know more about the dynamics between guilds. So, for example, like if I start a guild, what's the maximum amount of players that a guild could have? Will there be sort of like guild versus guild sort of events? Will certain guilds have different avatar features or costumes that others won't? Tell me a little bit more about that dynamic between guilds.
Well, basically we have a lot of stuff that we have planned for the guilds features. At launch it's probably going to be pretty basic, just the guild features that you would see in an MMORPG, just a way for people to build groups together and seek each other out and schedule events and participate in events together. Longer term, a lot of people have expressed a lot of interest in things like guild housing, guild specific events, specific types of guilds and things like that, guild wars, things of that nature that we're really excited to explore. Building an MMO in VR is a monumental task in and of itself. So we want to focus on getting the real core game loop really good first before we explore further features. But definitely in the pipeline, I would expect there to be a lot of really awesome guild customization features and guild ranks and things like guild bonuses and guild transmogs and things you can do to customize your character. I think those things would all be really, really cool to explore.
It's making an MMO for VR. When you say that, a lot of people have these ingrained expectations, and
Sure.
Before I walk into that question, because it's a big one, another one that will lead up to that one is EVE Online has this like economy that's very core to this MMO experience. I'm wondering if this is something that's crossed your minds. How would you even implement an economy? and sort of, again, if this is, what's your thoughts on having an economy inside of Zenith and having players trade, you know, monster skins or have bounties on each other, like, because it feels like the like if if I'm a guild leader and there's a player out there that's like, just causing mayhem, then maybe I can put a bounty on bounty on that person, and it would just have this, like, add to this sense of drama. Like I'm curious to know more about how what your thought process is when it comes to adding an economy types of features into the experience, into the game.
Well, I think when I look at player economies, I think they're key to any thriving MMO. That being said, I don't think we are at Eve levels of player economy with where we want to take this, at least not initially. Eve is basically, the whole thing is the player economy, right? Like everything is about farming ISK and like killing, doing bounties and destroying enemy ships and PvP and resource gathering. Our game is going to be more similar to games like Final Fantasy 14 and WoW, where there are really gorgeous curated areas to explore, and there will be an element of the player economy on it, but it will probably be restricted at first. So it's not going to be like you can sell anything and buy anything. It's going to be more like there are certain items that aren't soulbound that are sold, because if you design a game around the player economy as a whole, it's going to be very complex. The economy will take all of your design time and all of your efforts, basically. And what we're really focused on is building like a really strong core game loop, making the combat feel really fun, making progression feel really awesome. But that being said, we do have plans to have things like trading and auction houses and things like that. It'll just be probably more similar to something you would see in WoW or Black Desert than you would see in something like Eve.
Can you tell me more about progression? What does your design mind take you when it comes to progression? Like, how do you make it so that players feel constantly satisfied about their progress, and they don't feel like there's like the game is too grindy, or just walk me through what that looks like inside your mind.
Well, first of all, if we make the core combat really fun and exciting and visceral, like it won't feel as grindy, and that's why we're focusing on that, making the gameplay feel really fun. In terms of like making progression feel fun, I think it's all about layering loops on top of each other to really nail that, one last quest, I have to do one last thing in the game feel, so you're always close to your next kind of goal and sub goal, and then you have these sub goals that build up to like larger goals, like leveling up or advancing down your skill tree and things like that. So it's all about really kind of layering things together. So it's not just about leveling your character; it's about pursuing a bunch of sub goals at the same time, and those sub goals seem much more obtainable or achievable. We haven't announced a lot of our progression systems yet. By design, we're kind of waiting until we get closer to launch to talk about those things. But we're really excited because we think it's very innovative in a way that never been done before in VR. One thing I will say is one thing that we think is really cool is the idea of having each class be able to play a different role. Or multiple roles. So the idea being that you can have a melee class like our Blade Master that can play tank, DPS, or support. You can play all three of the, quote unquote, holy trinities inside an MMORPG. And you can also have a mage that tanks, for example. So every class will be able to play one of these main roles, and so that's a way to kind of encourage people to try out different roles as they're progressing through the game. But yeah, we're really excited about the way that we're implementing progression. We think it's going to allow for a lot of customization, and we're working with some world-class game designers that have had experience working as lead designers on one of our advisors is the lead designer on Cryptic's new MMO, the Magic the Gathering MMO that they're working on, and they've been helping us out with a lot of the content loops and game design. So really really excited to have people try it out.
That's awesome. And I think you did mention that there's people on your Discord and there are already people trying out an alpha version of it or a demo. How are you taking their feedback and applying it into your designs and the game overall? Like, what does that look like? How do you know whether someone is giving you valuable feedback? And then just sort of walk me through that workflow and again your thought process on how you approach getting user feedback to incorporate into Zenith.
So we had a pre-alpha that we ran. This was back in, I guess, starting in late March, I believe, and we ran that for about 2 months. We haven't, to our Kickstarter backers, we haven't shown a new build of the alpha to the wider Kickstarter audience or the wider audience as a whole since the pre-alpha. But what we have done is run smaller moderated user tests, both internally and with people outside of Ramen VR. So the way that we typically, during the pre-alpha, the way that we would gather feedback is we had basically a place like a support ticket forum where people could just, it's called User Echo. People could just post their bugs and the issues and their suggestions on that forum, and then we would see it, and we would, as we saw them, if they were P0 bugs, we would resolve them. And we also ran a weekly survey or bi-weekly survey every 2 weeks, rating things like from 1 to 5 on gameplay, sound, graphics, and stability, just to see if we were trending in the right direction as we were improving the game as we were working on the pre-alpha. And thankfully we were. So there, I guess that's 2 types of feedback that we try to gather. One is just like survey feedback. I guess 3. So one is survey feedback. The other is like feedback from bugs that are submitted via User Echo, and the third is the moderated user testing, and that's where we usually get our best insights because we get to sit down with the user in VR and ask them very in-depth questions. Oftentimes, what users will say in a forum or in a play test doesn't point to the actual issue they're experiencing. So what we're really trying to understand is more of the feeling they're getting and less about their specific advice to the game, right? Like if for example, if their advice, if they say that the game is too hard to play, that might not, and they want to just be able to do noodle sword fighting. That doesn't mean we go and implement noodle sword fighting. That probably means that we haven't, our first time user experience isn't doing a good enough job of teaching them how the game works. So it's more about like hearing the feedback and then parsing it for what they're actually experiencing rather than taking it at face value.
Yeah, it's really important that you're taking that approach. And again, piggyback or taking a step forward on this and going back to a question I had earlier about sort of expectations when and how do you temper the expectations that people have? Because when they hear MMO, they have all these like thoughts about, even me, like I'm thinking EVE Online, I'm thinking World of Warcraft, I'm thinking like some of the most and these are games and experiences made with like, dozens, hundreds of people and so what do you do to, you know, give people that fix that, for lack of a better word, that
Mm.
experience, but at the same time, you know, let them know that like, hey, it's not that yet, you know, but maybe it will be. How do you go about figuring that out? How do you walk that path, that line, that fine line?
Uh, yeah, that's a really good question. We have always tried to be really responsible with our marketing and the things that we say. You know, our world size, the game features that we'll have in the game. Um, I think it's important to note that there's probably a couple of core features that if we nail right, well, it'll feel like an MMO. And that's what we're focusing on. That's why we want to have really good progression loop. We want to have really good like systems for you know, getting you know, that loot progression, so it feels like you're getting really awesome loot and upgrading your items, and you feel like you're getting mastery of the game. Um, I like to tell people that, you know, initially what we're trying to do is we're trying to be the Ultima Online of VR, not the Ready Player One. Like, we have long-term ambitions where we want to become much bigger than just an MMO. And it's funny because like an MMO is already pretty big, right? But when you think about the first MMO, it was Ultima Online, right? That was started by a team of 5 people. Eventually, it grew to like 20 or 30, but that's still relatively small compared to today's, you know, WoW or Final Fantasy 14 or even Genshin, which is not a strict MMO but has some MMO-like mechanics. That's still relatively small. So that's what we're trying to be. We're not trying to build the entire world. We're trying to just be a small kind of scrappy team that can build something that's really compelling by being hyper focused on a few of the important kind of core game loops.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think we're down to the last couple questions, and I'm curious to know more about like, there's so many emotions that you can design for in VR. I think this is something that I'm starting to learn more about and explore, the idea that like, it's not just about like the visual content, the aesthetic. It's about what kind of emotions the users, the players are getting while they're in there. And some games or experiences in VR or even pancake mode are, you know, they'll invoke horror, fear. Others are more like funny. I mean, I'm thinking Phasmophobia, or and then on the other end, there's like the Rick and Morty experience, where it's just ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
it's just a wide spectrum. And so, where do you find Zenith on that spectrum of emotion that you're designing for, so that your users, like, you know, like on one end, like what does one extreme end look like versus the other? Like, is it like, because when I think of the sense of adventure, I'm thinking like suspense. I'm thinking like, oh man, I barely made it from that encounter with that giant monster thing. And but I feel like I need more time to think about. I feel like I've lacked the experience in a lot of MMOs. I haven't spent hundreds of hours in MMOs, and you know, perhaps the other side of the spectrum is, you know, like a feeling of belonging, of community, of like, oh, my guild,
Definitely.
my tribe. So I'm just curious to know, like, how are you, you know, what emotions are you trying to design for, and, you know, perhaps tell me more about that.
Well, as you've heard, you know, like for a very long time, I've been really interested in social experiences, starting from the Tribe VR like 5 or 6 years ago. What The other thing is, I actually got married to my wife in a VR in an MMO in Final Fantasy 14 before we got married in real life, which was funny, right?
Congratulations, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. But the point is that for me, it's all about community and belonging. You hit the nail right on the head. So when we want people to feel like they've come home, you know, when they've come when they enter Zenith, that no matter what crazy stuff is going on outside of the world, here is an environment where you can come home, you feel like you belong, you feel like you have a sense of purpose. We really want to provide that kind of social connection and social bonding that's so powerful in VR, but also in many other games that makes you feel like you're actually accomplishing something with a group of like-minded people. And when it really comes down to it, we just see the game mechanics within Zenith kind of being that shared hearth, or that fireplace that people can congregate around. You know, looking way back into to ancient times, you know, like you always had something that people can kind of congregate around and relate to, and so I think that's the difference between games and VR social spaces like VR chat is in games. There's something that you can discuss and be around, and so that's what we want the core game mechanics in Zenith to reflect.
Yeah, this is awesome. I feel like as we speak in real time, I'm like, it's hitting me like,
Yeah.
wow, this is gonna be awesome because on the one end, look, VR chat's amazing. I love VR chat, but sometimes I wonder, like, what am I doing here? I'm just hanging out, staring at myself in the mirror with other people, you know. And that, again, it's like,
Yeah.
it's not as anything inherently wrong with that, but like, I always feel more connected with others if we're working in a team towards an objective. Like, I was just playing Star Wars Squadrons with my little cousin, and we were both being like
Yeah.
coordinating, and I'd be like, "Hey, I got someone on my tail, and I'm doing loop-de-loops around," and he'd be like, "I'll be right there."
That's awesome.
And it's like, "Oh shit, he saved me," and it feels really good. And so in Zenith, like, besides fighting monsters and completing quests, you know, what other sorts of things do you envision people doing in with the social features? Like, do you think that there's going to be like a dance stage and people are all of a sudden going to be like performing for each other, or like just or, you know, maybe there's things that you don't expect. So I'm curious to know, you know, what you are anticipating, or who knows? I don't know what might come from that, because it's so human connection is so hard to explain and so hard to figure out how it all works. So yeah, tell me more.
Sure. So those are great questions. In terms of, well, first of all, I would argue that everything needs a core experience to gather around. If you look at the social apps that have succeeded, VR chat being an obvious one and Rec Room being another one, but VR chat, for example, does have like some core experiences. So they have an SDK where you can kind of build out funny like games or small things and build your own environments. And also, obviously, avatars are huge in VR chat. So I think that's the core experience. Basically, memeing. Like most people like in VR chat like bond over just like being silly and memeing together, which is something you can't do on a lot of other social platforms that are trying to be more like, you know, the Facebook of VR or whatever, which probably should be left to Facebook because they probably have a pretty big head start on that kind of stuff. So for Zenith, outside of traditional quests and the gameplay, we will have things like life skills. You know, cooking is one we've announced, but we've had a lot of other cool things that are unannounced. Cooking is an obvious cool one because it opens up the possibility to maybe sharing a meal with a friend in VR, and instead of just having, you know, a colorful plate there, eating it would actually give you some in-game benefits, right? So, you know, you could imagine people serving dishes at in their houses or things like that to kind of buff their friends and things like that. We also have want to have a lot of different social spaces and emotes for players to play around with. Customization, avatar customization is also something that we really want to plan. The long arc of our game is that long term we want Zenith to be the seed for people to create their own experiences off of. So, you know, like we want people to be able to create their own worlds, kind of similar to VR chat, and their own gameplay loops and own gameplay mechanics, and kind of eventually be able to release those on our on our platform, which is a huge undertaking, which is why it's not something that we're going after today. But if you look at the long term, that's kind of what we want to do, is enable and give people the tools to create their own kind of social spaces and interactions.
I would love that. I'm a big fan of things like Steam Workshop for like Left 4 Dead or Half-Life Alyx, where people are making, like the other day I was playing BioShock, but with Half-Life Alyx, content, and it was amazing. It was great. And there's a GoldenEye level for Half-Life Alyx, and then for Left 4 Dead, there's like a Resident Evil 2 mansion where you can play with your friends, and it just and those games and the way they went about it makes me really excited for what will come for you, because it's going to be awesome. I don't want to take too much of your time. I think we're going to run things, start bringing things down to a close. I have one last question.
Sure.
And, it's odd. I feel like maybe we met at SVVR, and I think that's where...
Yeah.
Okay, I remember now.
Yeah, we did, I think. Something like that.
Thank goodness. It's you've seen a lot. You've been through a lot, and I'm just curious, like, what have you learned, all these years trying to get yourself a firm footing and looking for a way to add value to the metaverse, and I'm just curious to know, like, what lessons have you learned, these past 5 to 6 years as a founder, as a creator, as someone who, I mean, yeah, man, you've come a long way. I'm so pumped for you. This is awesome.
Thanks, Chris. It's funny to think of myself as like an old timer in VR, because like it was not that long ago, but 5 or 6 years in VR is really long for most people. And then there's like the real, like, there's like Samak Bruce and Carl Krantz and a lot of people, like people that have been there for like before VR was like really a thing. And it's just been amazing to see it grow over time. One thing that I've learned is to not buy into all of the hype, or not be sucked into the whole media expectation thing of like people expecting VR to be like mobile, right? VR is not on the trajectory of mobile. It's not going to become like the iPhone tomorrow. It's following something is stable, and there's now a good business case to be made around it. But in terms of structuring our business, it's all been about survivability. Because the longer you can last, the closer you can get to the point where we think VR becomes kind of this viable platform. And we're really excited about things like, you have the high-end stuff like the Index, right? But now you also have like Quest 2 coming out, which is going to be amazing for VR. And so people say this every year, like this is going to be the year for VR. But, I think it's just going to be a series of steps up, and you just have to make sure that you're there for the next step. A lot of companies came in with the promise of building the metaverse overnight, raised millions and millions of dollars, and then, they disappeared in like 2 or 3 years because they had crazy amounts of burn rate. For us, we're trying to be very, very efficient with how we're spending our money, so that we can kind of build the right product without like burning everything right away.
I'm sold. I want to support you 100%. This is awesome. I'm so excited. How can people... Well, first, when is Zenith scheduled to come out? Or do you have any updates on that for people listening or watching about the game? Like anything you might want to share regarding that?
Well, I think the best way for people to stay engaged is to join our Discord.
Awesome.
So I can send you that link via email. The Discord we have a wonderful moderating team, and I personally do, and me and people on the developer teams do Ask Me Anythings on that once a day, where we'll just answer like the top most upvoted question. We're currently in our alpha phase, and we're hoping to release pre-orders soon that'll allow people to kind of support us and back and get the game. And what the pre-order will include is also access to our closed alpha and closed beta when the game becomes available. So you guys will be able to test the game early, give us feedback and things like that. Don't have a date on when we're going to release that stuff yet, but it should be, it shouldn't be that much longer. And we're targeting a 2021 full release for Zenith. I don't want to get more specific than that because I've gotten bitten before by like committing to things and then missing the dates. So, but we're confident about a 2021 release, and hopefully it's earlier rather than later.
Well, I'm super excited. How can people stay in touch with you and follow up with all the cool things that you're up to these days and all that good stuff?
Yeah, the best way to follow me is to I don't have much of a social media presence. I have to become a Twitter influencer, I guess. But Zenith MMO, follow that. That's the kind of the game Twitter handle, and we post updates to there all the time, and I also check it all the time. So.
Andy, it's been an honor and a pleasure to finally run into you once again, serendipitously in the metaverse. And I really appreciate your time. Thanks again for watching, everyone, or listening on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, all the good stuff. And I'll see you all in the metaverse.